Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today we will be discussing PKD's book Ubik, published in 1969. Originally, PKD had titled the book Death to the Anti-Watcher. The novel is concerned with half-life, wherein the dead exist in a state of preserved but slowly diminishing consciousness. Ubik was initially commissioned by Galaxy magazine, one of the leading publications for speculative fiction at the time. The editor, Fred Pohl, had been supportive of Dick's work. The novel ultimately bypassed serialization and went directly to book format under Doubleday. Structurally, Ubik operates like a hall of mirrors. Each chapter destabilizes the one before. The use of advertisements at the beginning of each chapter, initially light-hearted and increasingly theological, suggests a fusion of the commercial with the sacred. This book asks for a deeper review, so this video is probably going to be slightly longer than usual. Let's get into it. Ubik begins in a world of corporate espionage, centered on telepathy suppression and set in the year 1992. In this capitalist techno society, telepaths and precognitives are employed by powerful corporations, making psychic privacy a rare commodity. The protagonist, Joe Chip, a technician, works for Runciter Associates, a firm that deploys inertials. These are individuals who can block psychic intrusions. His employer, Glen Runciter, routinely consults with his wife, Ella, who, by conventional definition, is dead. Her body is stored in cold pack at a Swiss moratorium, where the deceased remain in a state known as half-life, a kind of liminal consciousness shaped by their residual mental energy. In the moratorium, the living can occasionally communicate with those in half-life. During one such visit, Runciter detects interference from another half-lifer, a teenager named Jory, who's stored near his wife Ella. This detail becomes crucial as the narrative unfolds. On the surface, the story follows a corporate skirmish that escalates into a doomed lunar mission. When a bomb explodes on the moon, Runciter appears to die, and the surviving team members return to Earth. However, in the experience of the apparent survivors of the explosion, objects begin to regress in time. Reality destabilizes, and Runciter's messages begin to appear everywhere, on walls and in media. This implies that Runciter, in fact, is still alive, and the others might be the ones who actually perished and now experience half-life. As the team members start dying one by one in strange and inexplicit ways, Joe Chip, the protagonist, receives more and more communications from Runciter. The only thing that seems to resist the unraveling of reality is Ubik, a mysterious aerosol spray capable of preserving the existence of those in half-life. Rather than offering a straightforward narrative arc, the novel operates like a recursive loop, continually blurring the boundaries between reality and illusion, life and death. The plot centers on epistemological instability. Who controls reality? Who is truly alive? And what does it mean to persist? These questions are never answered definitely. Instead, the book insists that they remain open and unsettling. Time in Ubik is a volatile and malleable force, both a narrative mechanism and a metaphysical metaphor. PKD manipulates temporal flow to challenge conventional notions of chronology, causality, and decay. At the outset, time appears stable. Events unfold in a familiar, linear fashion. However, following the disastrous lunar mission, time begins to regress in strange and surreal ways. Objects de-age, cigarettes go stale, packaging deteriorates, and entire environments slip backward into early eras, eventually resembling the 1930s. Dick employs this entropic reversal as both a plot device and a conceptual provocation. Gradually, protagonist Joe Chip comes to realize that his reality is unraveling. Initially, he attributes these distortions to a character named Pat, a fellow team member with a psychic ability to alter the past. Dick conveys this regression through dark, comic, and eerie details. Outdated coins, malfunctioning appliances, and collapsing environments all signal the disintegration of the present. As the story progresses, Joe suspects a deeper cause, that he and the others may already be dead, their consciousnesses lingering in the deteriorating half-life state. Their bodies are stored in cold packed chambers at said Swiss moratorium, while their minds remain trapped in a decaying mental simulation. Their world becomes a kind of purgatory, a liminal space where perception continues but reality crumbles. In this half life construct, two opposing forces emerge. Ella Runciter, Glen Runciter's deceased wife, represents a stabilizing, benevolent presence. In contrast, Yori, the teenager half-lifer, is revealed to be a psychic parasite. He feeds on the mental energy of others, siphoning their remaining mental energy and reshaping time to maintain control. His manipulations lie at the heart of the temporal chaos consuming Joe's reality. The only apparent defense against this collapse is Ubik, a mysterious substance that can momentarily restore objects and people to their uncorrupted state. Introduced late in the narrative, Ubik, the product, is marketed as a ubiquitous product. Ubik is everywhere, giving it the aura of both a literal cure and a symbolic force. It becomes time's counteragent, halting entropy and evoking themes of salvation, all within the language of marketing and product branding. Ultimately, time in Ubik is neither linear nor strictly psychological. It is refracted through death, through commodification and parasitic memory. Dick transforms time into a fluid, unstable condition, one that foregrounds deeper philosophical questions about what it means to exist, to endure, and to decay. PKD constructs a metaphysical allegory where Ubik functions as a cryptic analog to the Holy Spirit, an all-pervasive stabilizing force that sustains reality amidst ontological decay and manifesting in banal commercial forms, yet speaking with divine authority. The following is the commercial that precedes the last chapter in the book. I am Ubik. Before the universe was, I am. I made the suns, I made the worlds, I created the lives and the places they inhabit. I move them here, I put them there. There they go as I say, they do as I tell them. I am the world, and my name is never spoken, the name which no one knows. I am called Ubik, but that is not my name. I am, I shall always be. In his essay, How to Build a Universe That Doesn't Fall Apart 2 days Later, PKD references the fictional Ubik commercial, stating, "It is obvious from this who and what Ubik is. It specifically says that it is the word, which is to say, the Logos." Here Dick identifies Ubik as a metaphor for the Logos, the divine rational principle or the Word of God, positioning it as a symbol of salvation, coherence, and the hidden structure underlying all of reality. He interweaves Gnostic, Christian, and philosophical traditions to frame Ubik as the sustaining force that redeems a disordered world. Within the contested realm of half-life, Ella Runciter emerges as a personification of good. Unlike others lost in confusion or decay, she retains autonomy, clarity, and a quiet ethical determination. Her decision to relinquish her limited half life existence for the sake of others and her alignment with Ubik exemplifies spiritual strength rooted in care, sacrifice, and moral resolve. She stands as a counterforce to entropy, an agent of order in a collapsing metaphysical landscape. In stark opposition is Yori, a parasitic entity who represents evil, illusion, and spiritual cannibalism. Feeding on the mental energy of others, Yori warps reality to sustain his own egoic dominance. He regresses time, fragments identity, and embodies a force akin to a satanic archetype, deceptive, destructive, and ontologically corrosive. Dick frames this conflict not in cosmic or mythic spectacle, but in the psychological and the mundane, a can of spray, an act of belief. The battle between Ubik and Yori becomes a spiritual war waged through subtle symbols between that which preserves identity and meaning and that which seeks to dissolve them. In this light, the novel is more than speculative fiction. It is a veiled Gnostic vision. It suggests that even within realms of illusion and decay, a sacred presence endures, upholding the real, sustaining coherence, and offering redemption. Glen Runciter occupies a unique ontological position. He appears to be a witness and custodian of life. In contrast to the decaying mental constructs inhabited by others, Runciter initially operates within a reality that seems stable, linear, and grounded. He acts as the empirical anchor of the narrative, a corporate patriarch who essentially dispatches his team into half life, manages crises, and seemingly retains clarity and control. However, toward the end of the novel, even Runciter's reality begins to unravel. He encounters increasingly surreal anomalies, most notably coins bearing Joe Chip's face, which suggests that his world, too, is subject to corruption or infiltration. These disturbances blur the boundary between the living and the dead, collapsing what once appeared to be a fixed divide. Dick invokes a central motif of his work. There is no guaranteed reality. I'd like to offer you another excerpt from another of Dick's essays called Man, Android, and Machine, in which he lays out his view, a view that certainly is mirrored in his novel Ubik. The quote in question goes as follows: "If you assume, and you'd be correct to do so, that our minds are energy fields of some kind anyhow, and that we are fundamentally interacting fields rather than discrete particles, then there is no theoretical problem in grasping this interaction between the billions of brain prints emanating and forming and reforming into the patterns of the noosphere. However, if you still hold the 19th century view of yourself as a brittle organism, much like a machine made out of parts, well, you see, then how can you merge with the noosphere? You are a unique, concrete thing, and thingness is what we must get away from in regarding ourselves and in considering life." Runciter initially symbolizes order, rationality, and authoritative perspectives. He occupies the role of the realist in a metaphysical chaos, attempting to restore coherence to the unraveling world. But Dick slowly destabilizes this position. As the ontological layers fray, Runciter becomes just as vulnerable to uncertainty as the rest of the characters. His presence no longer guarantees access to a higher or truer plane of reality. Instead, it underscores the fragility of such categories altogether. What begins as a binary structure, living versus half life, spirit versus decay, dissolves into a continuum of provisional states. Dick constructs a metaphysical vision in which all apparent divisions, life, death, real, false, good, evil, are revealed to be fluid, contingent, and temporary. Reality is not a fixed domain, but a dynamic, permeable field shaped by psychological, spiritual, or anthropic forces that transcend conventional categories. In this schema, Runciter's role becomes deeply ironic. Though he appears grounded in the real, he too drifts with a layered, unstable cosmos. His efforts to reassert control mirror a broader existential struggle, the futile attempt to impose order in a universe where reality is not inherited but performed, and where meaning is never final but only fleetingly secured. In Ubik, the figure of God is conspicuously absent in any traditional theistic form, but this absence is itself deeply significant. If Ubik is read as an analogue for the Holy Spirit, protective, sustaining, and yet never fully manifest, then the God figure emerges as the hidden source behind it, a presence that precedes perception and exceeds representation, yet remains immanent in every act that resists disintegration. This God is not a character, but a transcendental condition, the ground of being that never appears directly, only indirectly through effects, the stabilizing presence of Ubik, the moral resolve of Ella Runciter, the persistent human yearning for coherence in an unraveling world. In this framework, God operates not as an anthropomorphic deity, but as something closer to a Platonic form or a Gnostic first principle, the origin of order, meaning, and metaphysical resistance to entropy. Yet, this divine principle is not omnipotent in the classical sense. Evil personified in Yori persists, chaos intrudes, even the real world is compromised and unstable. The god of Ubik may be a limited or wounded deity whose power is sufficient to resist decay but not to eliminate it, a notion resonant with certain Gnostic cosmologies in which the true God is distant or hidden while the cosmos is governed by flawed and lesser powers. This vision reframes existence as a spiritual battleground where reality is not a given but a fragile construct, something that must be actively maintained. God does not rule or judge, he underwrites coherence itself. His presence is not visible but traceable, revealed in brief acts of preservation, protection, and enduring meaning. In Ubik, then, God's invisibility is not evidence of non existence, but of radical transcendence. He is not the architect of a perfect world, but the sustaining force within an imperfect one, a silent guarantor of being, glimpsed only in those moments when being resists falling apart. While Ubik is typically classified as science fiction or metaphysical satire, its horror is no less profound than that found in Gothic or cosmic horror traditions. Philip K. Dick does not rely on the grotesque, the monstrous, or the overly violent. Instead, he conjures a more insidious dread, a horror that is ontological, metaphysical, and internal. His method is not to frighten through spectacle, but to destabilize, to dissolve the reader's grip on reality, and to evoke the terror, not of death, but of unbeing. The horror lies not in annihilation, but in the meaninglessness of regression. As the temporal axis collapses, so too does the reliability of perception. Joe Chip, like the reader, loses access to stable coordinates of existence. This epistemic erosion, where the map no longer corresponds to the territory, is Dick's version of horror. The ordinary becomes treacherous, objects betray their function, reality becomes increasingly untrustworthy. The novel's true antagonist, Yori Miller, embodies another axis of horror. He is a child, symbolically innocent, but in the half-life world he becomes a psychovorous entity, feeding on the consciousnesses of others. Jory's horror is not in his form, but in his function. He is both banal and pervasive. He does not stalk his victims, he absorbs them. In what should be a place of rest and healing, Yori turns half-life into a spiritual feeding ground. Another deeply Dickian terror is ontological instability. Characters live and die, but neither state is permanent. The dead communicate and the living disintegrate. Identities slide across ambiguous thresholds. The question, am I real, becomes not just Joe Chip's question, but the reader's as well. Even Dick's satire of consumer culture serves as a vector of horror. A door demands payment to open. Divine intervention arrives in a spray can. Ubik, the salvific force in the novel, is commodified, its presence marketed through pseudo-commercials at the start of each chapter. The sacred is sold, redemption is branded, the absurdity is chilling. Here the horror is existential, even salvation is a product. In a world where God may be trademarked, where does one turn for authentic meaning? The horror lies not only in being trapped in a collapsing reality, but in the bleak realization that one's last hope might be a brand name item. Transcendence has become transactional. Finally, Dick delivers his coup de grace in the novel's closing twist. After Joe Chips seemingly reclaims stability within Half-Life, the narrative returns to Runciter, who discovers coins imprinted with Joe's face, as we've discussed before. This moment undoes any illusion of resolution. It implies either that Runciter too is trapped in Half-Life, or worse, that the boundary between life and Half-Life itself is illusionary. I need to slip in a personal observation at this point. I tend to fall asleep while reading quite often, and during Ubik, somewhere around the midpoint of the novel, something strange happened to me. I kept drifting in and out of sleep, and in that hypnagogic state, I began receiving what felt like downloads of insight. It was as if I was being fed information about how consensus reality functions, not as a fixed structure, but as a malleable field, as Dick describes, shaped by the collective emotional investment that we pour into it. Thoughts surfaced like if we all stopped believing in this world story, it would simply dissolve, and it felt like I was tapping into a kind of PKD knowledge vault. At one point I thought, shit, I should really be writing this stuff down, but I was too tired and fell back asleep, and I trusted that I'd remember it when I would wake up. And naturally, I was only left with fragments and a kind of inner knowing that's nearly impossible to articulate. And that reminded me of a dream Philip Dick once recounted, where he was shown the workings of an advanced propulsion system in his sleep. And afterward, he spent months poring over engineering texts and manuals, trying to reconstruct and explain what he had seen in the dream. Of course, he never managed to do so. And I'm just wondering, have you ever had similar experiences when reading Philip K. Dick's work? If so, share your comments in the comment section. I'd be curious to find out. Philip K. Dick's Ubik is layered with truths that seem to operate at the edge of intelligibility, truths that gesture towards a reality far more fragile, permeable, and psycho-spiritual than our inherited materialist worldview allows. The novel speculates about alternative realities, and it destabilizes the very premise of a fixed singular reality. And in doing so, Dick is offering a diagnostic tool for existence, inviting us to question the ontological foundations we take for granted. One of the profound truths Dick may be hinting at is the idea that reality is not a given, but an active process, a negotiation between perception, belief, and deeper metaphysical forces. Our own world then might also be less ontologically solid than it appears and more subject to shifts in consciousness, in perception, and collective agreement. As for how to live, Dick does not moralize, but he does leave clues. Ubik quietly endorses attention, care, humility, and spiritual discernment as survival tools. The characters who survive are not the most powerful or rational, but the most attuned, those who trust inner guidance, remain open to mystery, and resist the seductive pull of comforting illusions. The spray can of Ubik, a banal item infused with salvific power, teaches us that the sacred can appear in lowly and overlooked forms. It urges us to stay vigilant for meaning in the ordinary, to guard against nihilism, and to treat each moment as potentially revelatory. Ultimately, Dick suggests that the world is not fully what it seems, and neither are we. Our identities, perceptions, and memories are precarious. But beneath this chaos, there may be something or someone trying to help us, trying to reach us, trying to preserve what's real in us. The final truth Dick hints at might be this: even in a fragmented, possibly simulated universe, something good is still holding the center, and if we listen carefully, we might align ourselves with it. PKD's work is laced with irony, satire, and a very specific kind of absurdity that's both bleak and hilarious. Take, for instance, the hotels. In Ubik, hotels come equipped with complimentary amphetamines and tranquilizers, often as a standard courtesy to guests, like towels or soap. The idea that a place of rest casually stocks chemical coping mechanisms speaks volumes, not just about the absurdity of the world that Dick builds, but about the very real anxieties of modern life. Also, hotels and apartments alike are ruthless when it comes to the basics. In Dick's world, you have to pay for everything, literally everything. The door won't open unless you feed it a coin. The coffee machine will withhold your brew until it's been paid. Even your home appliances have personalities and financial expectations. Then there's the way Dick describes and exaggerates his characters. To get a better sense of how Dick envisioned them, I actually had an AI generate portraits based on the descriptions offered in the book, and I will include a short image gallery at the end of this video. Ubik left me with a lingering sense of awe. Its surreal logic, ontological disorientation, and razor-sharp critique of consumerism still echo long after the final page. PKD once more asks what it means to be alive, to perceive, to believe. I found myself haunted by the book's shifting timelines and unreliable perceptions. It's a novel that rewards not just attention, but reflection, a rare blend of pulp energy and philosophical depth that makes it one of Dick's most compelling works, in my opinion. I clearly give this book a 5 out of 5 rating. It's a masterpiece, and it requires you to sit with the questions and puzzles it evokes in you. I'm including links to a free audiobook and print version in the description box below. If you liked this episode, please give it a like. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.